5 forgotten disasters nobody talks about. 5 disasters that killed thousands of people. You've probably never heard of any of them. Some disasters become part of history. They get movies, memorials, and anniversaries. But others, sometimes even deadlier, just disappear. Not because they weren't catastrophic, but because something else happened at the same time, or because a government buried the truth, or because the victim simply didn't matter enough to the people writing the headlines. These are 5 of the most devastating disasters in modern history that most people have never heard of. Number 5. The Peshtigo Fire, Wisconsin, 1871. On the night of October 8, 1871, the deadliest wildfire in American history swept through northeastern Wisconsin. The town of Peshtigo was erased from existence in roughly 90 minutes. That summer had been brutally dry. Logging operations had left the forest filled with dried branches and sawdust. Small fires had been burning across the region for weeks. Nobody was particularly worried. Then the wind shifted. Witnesses described a sound like a freight train, a wall of fire moving faster than people could run. The flames created their own weather system, a fire tornado. Temperatures at the center reached over 2,000 degrees. People who jumped into the Peshtigo River survived. People who hesitated for even a few seconds did not. The fire consumed 1.2 million acres across 6 counties. Entire towns were gone. Between 2,500 and 2,500 people died. The exact number will never be known, because the town's records burned with everything else. But here's why you've never heard of it. On that exact same night, October 8, 1871, the Great Chicago Fire broke out. Same night, same weather pattern. Chicago was a major city. Peshtigo was a lumber town. Every newspaper in the country covered Chicago. Peshtigo was forgotten before the smoke cleared. To this day, the Great Chicago Fire is one of the most famous disasters in American history. The Peshtigo Fire, which killed 6 times as many people, barely gets a footnote. Number 4. The Halifax Explosion, Nova Scotia, Canada, 1917. On the morning of December 6, 1917, a French cargo ship called the Mont Blanc was entering the harbor at Halifax, Nova Scotia. Its hold was packed with wartime explosives, over 2,600 tons of TNT, benzol, and picric acid. At about 8:45 a.m., it collided with a Norwegian vessel in the narrows of the harbor. The impact started a fire on the Mont Blanc's deck. The crew abandoned ship. The burning vessel drifted toward the Halifax waterfront. People gathered along the shore to watch. They had no idea what was on board. At 9:04 a.m., the Mont Blanc detonated. It was the largest man-made explosion in history up to that point. The blast leveled everything within a half-mile radius. A shockwave traveled across the harbor and flattened the community of Dartmouth on the other side. The explosion launched a column of white smoke over 3 miles into the sky. A tsunami wave rose 60 feet above the harbor's high water mark. Nearly 2,000 people were killed. 9,000 more were injured. Over 6,000 people were left homeless in the middle of a Canadian winter. Hundreds were blinded by flying glass from windows that shattered miles from the blast. And then the next day, a blizzard hit Halifax. 16 inches of snow fell on top of the wreckage, burying survivors who were still trapped. The Halifax explosion held the record as the largest man-made explosion for nearly 28 years, until the first nuclear bomb was tested in 1945. Yet outside of Canada, almost nobody knows it happened. Number 3. Lake Nyos, Cameroon, 1986. On the evening of August 21, 1986, a lake in the mountains of Cameroon killed nearly 1,800 people without making a sound. Lake Nyos sits in the crater of an inactive volcano. For centuries, carbon dioxide had been seeping from the volcanic rock beneath the lakebed, dissolving into the deep water under immense pressure. The lake was essentially a giant bottle of carbonated water, held in place by gravity and temperature. On that night, something disturbed the lake. Scientists still debate what triggered it. A landslide, a temperature shift. It doesn't matter. The bottom layer of the lake turned over, and the CO2 was released all at once. The eruption launched a column of water over 300 feet into the air, and released a cloud of carbon dioxide so dense it hugged the ground. CO2 is heavier than oxygen. The gas rolled downhill through the surrounding valleys at speeds estimated over 40 miles per hour. People didn't see it, didn't smell it, they simply stopped breathing. By the next morning, 1,746 people were dead, along with over 3,500 livestock and virtually every living thing within a 16-mile radius. Survivors who had been on higher ground woke up and walked into villages full of bodies. Many thought a neutron bomb had gone off. The event was so unusual that scientists had to create a new term for it, a limnic eruption. It had only been documented once before, at nearby Lake Manun 2 years earlier, which killed 37 people. Lake Nyos is still active. Engineers installed degassing pipes in 2001 to slowly vent the CO2, but studies suggest the gas is accumulating faster than the pipes can release it. And Lake Nyos isn't the only one. Lake Kivu, on the border of Congo and Rwanda, is 2,000 times larger and sits next to 2 million people. Number 2. The Bhopal Gas Disaster. India, 1984. Shortly after midnight on December 3, 1984, a pesticide plant owned by Union Carbide in the city of Bhopal, India began leaking methyl isocyanate gas. MIC is so toxic that exposure to just a few parts per million can be fatal. That night, over 40 tons of it poured into the air. The gas settled over the densely populated neighborhoods surrounding the plant. Most people were asleep. They woke up choking, unable to see, unable to breathe. People ran into the streets, but the gas was everywhere. Some died standing up. Others collapsed in doorways. Parents carried children who were already gone. By morning, the streets of Bhopal were lined with bodies. Between 3,800 and 16,000 people died in the first 72 hours. The actual number is still disputed because the Indian government and Union Carbide had every reason to keep it low, but the immediate deaths were only part of the story. Over 500,000 people were exposed to the gas. In the months and years that followed, tens of thousands developed chronic respiratory disease, blindness, immune disorders, and neurological damage. Birth defects spiked across the region. An estimated 15,000 to 25,000 more people died from long-term exposure. Union Carbide settled with the Indian government in 1989 for $470 million. That worked out to roughly $500 per victim. The CEO, Warren Anderson, was charged with manslaughter by an Indian court. He never stood trial. He lived in his Long Island home until he died in 2014 at the age of 92. The factory site has never been fully cleaned. Toxic chemicals still contaminate the groundwater. People living near the plant are still getting sick. 40 years later, Bhopal is still an active disaster. Number 1. The Banqiao Dam Collapse. China, 1975. In August 1975, Typhoon Nina stalled over the Henan province of central China and dumped a year's worth of rain in 24 hours. The Banqiao Dam, built in the 1950s with Soviet technical assistance, held back a reservoir containing over 600 million cubic meters of water. Engineers had warned about the dam's design flaws years earlier. The sluice gates were inadequate, the spillways were too small. Sediment had been building up and reducing capacity. A hydrologist named Chen Xing had specifically warned that the dam would fail in a major flood event. He was removed from the project for being too outspoken. On August 8th, at around 1 a.m., the Banqiao Dam failed. A wall of water 10 meters high and 12 kilometers wide, traveling at nearly 50 kilometers per hour, roared through the valley below. The force of the flood caused 62 additional dams to collapse downstream in a chain reaction. Entire villages were gone before anyone could send a warning. In the town of Daowencheng, a community of 9,600 people, only 827 survived. The official death toll from the initial flood was 26,000 people. But that was just the first wave. The flooding destroyed crops across the region and contaminated water supplies. In the weeks that followed, an estimated 145,000 more people died from famine and epidemics. Some estimates pushed the total death toll past 230,000. The Chinese government classified the entire event. For 20 years, the world had no idea it happened. The disaster wasn't publicly acknowledged until 2005. It remains the deadliest dam failure in human history. The deadliest infrastructure failure in human history, and for 2 decades, it was a secret. 5 disasters, tens of thousands of lives, and most of the world has no idea any of them happened. History doesn't remember every catastrophe equally. Sometimes the bigger story drowns out the bigger tragedy. Sometimes a government decides the truth is too dangerous. And sometimes, the people who died just didn't live in a place the rest of the world was paying attention to. If you want to make sure you don't miss the stories nobody else is covering, subscribe to Village 5.